2 horrific true restaurant horror stories. Story 1. Stalked in Rio, a nightmarish solo trip. I was 25 years old when I decided to embark on a solo trip to Rio de Janeiro. My favorite DJ was scheduled to perform there that weekend, and it was an opportunity one couldn't pass up. I had traveled solo many times in my life without any issues, so I felt confident about this adventure. My Airbnb was a bit outside the city, but it was a comfortable and modern one-floor house. The first day and night in Rio went smoothly, and I even met some new friends, James, Ethan, and Jess, who were also on a trip in the city. The next day, we explored famous landmarks like the Christ Redeemer and Sugarloaf Mountain, and then hit the beaches. Unfortunately, they had tickets for another show that evening, so I found myself on my own again. As I wandered through the city, I stumbled upon a small, dimly lit restaurant. While my Portuguese was limited, I tried to find places where English was spoken when dining alone. I noticed a man, around 50 years old, sitting alone at a nearby table. He seemed like another tourist, and we were the only solo diners in the restaurant. The server initially spoke to me in Portuguese, but when I asked if he spoke English, he switched. The man at the neighboring table kept watching me as I ordered, which was a bit strange. After the server took my order, the man complimented my Portuguese and started giving me language lessons. I humored him, trying to be polite, even though his attention was making me uncomfortable. Our conversation shifted to personal questions: where I was from, why I was in Rio, what I had done that day, and where I was staying. To avoid any awkwardness, I lied, claiming I was staying with a friend. What truly unnerved me was when he commented on how sexy my Portuguese sounded. I hoped he would leave soon, but when the waiter brought his food, I knew I had to find a way to exit this situation. I quickly finished my meal and asked for the check, hoping to escape the man's company. Strangely, he also asked for the check immediately, even though he was still eating. After I paid, I left the restaurant, but the man said something in Portuguese. I replied with a quick goodbye and kept walking. As I made my way back to the Airbnb, it was dark outside, and the streets were quieter. At an intersection, I noticed the man from the restaurant across the street. He seemed to be looking at me, but turned away when he realized I saw him. Maybe he was heading in the same direction, I thought. I continued walking, occasionally glancing back to see if he was following me. When I reached the Airbnb, I felt my heart drop as I saw the man standing on a distant corner, still staring in my direction. He was following me. I rushed inside, locked the door, and closed all the blinds. Panic set in. He now knew where I was staying. I called my dad in a panic, explaining the situation. He advised me to stay alert, keep everything locked, and even suggested having a knife handy. It was a Saturday night, and my flight wasn't until the next day, so I wanted to go out. Eventually, I called an Uber to a downtown bar with house music. After a couple of hours at the bar, I called another Uber back to the Airbnb. I entered the house, feeling a bit tipsy, and sat down to relax. But something caught my attention: the sound of a breeze and the blinds in the kitchen window moving. I had all the windows shut because of the air conditioning. I realized with horror that the window in the kitchen was open. I knew I had closed all the windows before leaving. I didn't hesitate. I called the emergency number and tried to convey in Portuguese that there was a home break-in. The police arrived within minutes. Cautiously, I emerged from my hiding spot across the street and watched as they entered the house. They yelled commands I couldn't understand, and then I saw them escorting a man out of the house in handcuffs. The mix of emotions I felt was overwhelming: disbelief, relief, and horror. If I hadn't called the police, if I had entered the bedroom where he was probably hiding, I shuddered at the thought. The man was taken away, and I never had to see his face again. I was relieved he had left the window open, but I should have listened to my dad and locked all the windows. I left Rio the next day and haven't returned since. haunted by the memory of that terrifying encounter. Story 2. Stalked by a Stranger, a Waitress's Terrifying Tale. I was 19 years old when I found myself struggling financially, so I took on a second job as a waitress at a 24-hour diner. The late-night shift was typically quiet, with mostly night owls, shift workers, or bar-goers stopping by. One night, a larger man entered the diner around 1 a.m. He was alone, and I greeted him with a friendly smile as I seated him at a table. From the moment he arrived, he started flirting with me. It was always the older, unattractive customers who seemed the most forward, but I had to keep my composure as tips were crucial. He ordered a burger and a milkshake and introduced himself as Trevor. Throughout the night, he kept staring at me, making me uncomfortable. When he asked for the check, I hoped he would leave soon. He left a modest $5 tip along with his number and a winking face on the bill, which I found off-putting. I crumpled it up and discarded it. I thought that was the end of Trevor's advances, but it wasn't. A few nights later, he returned to the diner late at night when it was almost empty. He recognized me, called me his favorite server, and struck up another conversation, trying to be polite and earn a better tip. I entertained his small talk. He eventually invited me to join him on his boat, showing me a photo of a tiny vessel that could barely accommodate 2 people. I politely declined, citing work rules, but he didn't give up. When he left, he once again left his number on the bill, insisting that I text him, saying it would be our little secret. Still, he only tipped $5, and I found myself growing increasingly uncomfortable with his persistence. A week later, Trevor returned once more, this time late at night. He asked, "You don't call her, right?" With a serious expression. I explained that I couldn't text customers, but he left without saying a word, leaving me relieved. However, the following day, one of my fellow waitresses messaged me, asking if I knew who the fat bald guy was. She had given him my full name. This made me uneasy, as I realized that Trevor now had information about me beyond my first name. Later that day, I received a text from Trevor himself. He admitted to taking it upon himself to find my number, claiming he hadn't broken any rules. Shocked and scared, I blocked his number immediately, hoping that would be the end of it. But it wasn't over. A few days later, I found an envelope under my car's windshield wiper. Inside were disturbing pictures of me at the diner, taken from the parking lot, as well as photos of my apartment building, me unlocking my front door, and even a shot taken through my front window at night. I reported this to the police, providing them with the photos and the text messages as evidence. Frightened for my safety, I quit my job at the restaurant and moved to a new apartment when my lease was up. Thankfully, the police took the matter seriously and warned Trevor about harassment. It was the first and only time I had ever dealt with a stalker, and I hoped that blocking him and moving to a new place would finally put an end to the nightmare.